Well, this is another PFE refrigerator train. This is a string of 50-foot mechanical refrigerators. As I mentioned earlier, on the train we have an SD40 and two SD45s. We had a little minor hitch in the get along here for some reason or other. The last three cars uncoupled from the train, and I rear-ended the caboose and the three cars, and that caused a bit of a debacle. Well, this is where it uncoupled the last time, and it looks like it stayed coupled, so anyhow, the train got by. And you can see our furnace out here. Anyway, this is coming out of the tunnel. And here's coming out of the tunnel. As mentioned earlier, the F units were all gone by 1972. They were traded in on SD40s and SD45s. And the SD40s and SD45s were rebuilt in the 1980s by Southern Pacific shops at Roseville. They were rebuilt from the wheels up as the SD9s and GP9s were earlier. This train is all Athearn mechanical reefers. All mechanical reefers, all 50-footers. The cars are equipped with KD number 518 roller bearing trucks and KD number 5 couplers. This train is a lot newer than the ice bunker train, but it is all Athearn blue box cars. Well, the SD45s, of which SP had about 360 of, had a problem in tunnels and snow sheds of overheating. The exhaust on an SD45 is right here. This is an SD45 T2, but the exhaust on an SD45 is in the same location as on the SD45 T2. And then the cooling radiator fans were back here, and they pulled the air down and vented it out the sides of the grills on the SD45. And so they're pulling hot air right into the cooling system on the SD45s, and they're causing the engines to overheat and shut down. So the tunnel motor design, this is an SD45 T-2. These replaced this SD45s for the most part in the mountainous territory on the SP, and they pull the cooling air in. You just notice there's a grill down here by the walkway. They pull the cool air in here and vent it out the top. So they weren't pulling the exhaust right back into the cooling system. So anyhow, the Southern Pacific, along with Electromotive Division, designed the tunnel motor modification to the SD45. It still had the same running gear. They had the V20 645E engine in it, but had a modification to the cooling system, which also required the locomotive to be slightly longer than a standard SD45. So I've got on the reefer train here, I have a pair of SD45 T-2s, and then Southern Pacific later bought SD40 T-2s, of which I have a few. So this is a SD40 T-2. The SD40 T-2 has a 645E engine in it, but the 16-cylinder version rather than the 20-cylinder version like in the SD45 T-2. So anyhow, there's a pair of SD45Ts and an SD40T on the PFE mechanical reefer train. As I mentioned earlier, all these cars are Athearn 50-foot mechanical refrigerator cars. They're all weighted to 5 ounces a car. They have KD number 518 roller bearing trucks under them and KD number 5 couplers. So I'll give you some idea how the train is put together. Well, during the mid-1970s, the United States celebrated their 200th anniversary of us being an independent country, and many of the railroads painted locomotives in bicentennial color schemes, and the SP was no exception. They had 3 locomotives painted this way. This is a SD45 T-2 from the Cotton Belt, which Southern Pacific basically owned the Cotton Belt. They bought it out in the 1960s, in the 1930s, and it was actually operated as just another part of the SP. This locomotive was delivered from the factory in the bicentennial paint scheme, and it's an SD45 T-2 number 9389. There was also a U25B that Southern Pacific painted in bicentennial colors themselves, and then there was the 3196, I believe it was, or 3197. It was a GP40P that Southern Pacific bought at the same time. It also came from the factory in the bicentennial color scheme. But this is the Cotton Belt unit. Southern Pacific also purchased General Electric locomotives. This is a U33C. Southern Pacific had the largest fleet of U33Cs. They had 212 units. Of course, they're all long gone now. It was very, very rare to see General Electric power north and east of Roseville. They were basically, General Electric power was basically used south out of Roseville down the Central Valley line, over to Tehachapi, and then east out of Los Angeles. And on the coastline between Los Angeles and San Francisco, you would find General Electric power. But up here in Oregon, General Electric power was very, very rare. In fact, after 1975, about the only thing we saw up here was SD45s, SD45 T2s, SD40 T2s, and SD40s. And on the branch lines, we had SD9s, and in the yards, we had SW1500s, of which SP also had the largest fleet of SW1500s, which is like we have here. This is an SW1500. SP had 240 SW1500s. Well, on the train we have a U33C, a U30C, and an SD40 on the PFE train. The GE and EMD power was freely mixed south of Roseville and east of Los Angeles, and on the coastline, as I mentioned earlier. Up here in Oregon, over Donner Pass, north and east of Roseville, GE power was very, very rare. Well, here we have an SD45. As mentioned earlier, the SD45s had a problem with the exhaust going into the cooling system and causing the engines to overheat and shut down. The exhaust is right here and the cooling fans are right back here, so in a tunnel where the exhaust was trapped in the top part of the tunnel, the exhaust would come out here, go up over the top of the dynamic brake fans, and then these fans here would pull the air in and it would be exhausted out through the vents on through the grill on the side of the locomotive here. And that caused as I mentioned, caused the engine to overheat and shut down. So the tunnel motor design was developed. We have a tunnel motor right here, the SD45T-2, and it too has its exhaust right here, but instead of bringing the air in back here, the air was brought in down here by the walkway, and it was brought in, and fans pushed it up rather than pulling the hot air into the engine. And so anyhow, we have an SD45T-2 right here. The SD45T-2 is about 5 feet longer than the standard SD45. As you can see here, the SD45T-2 in the back and the standard SD45 out here on the front. You can see how much they hang over. The SD45T being a little bit longer. Well, the SD40 trailing on this reefer train, when I built this model, I gave it a number just to give the yellow peril people something to jump up and down about. So you can see it's numbered up 8444. The Union Pacific had a steam engine number 844, and in 1962 they bought a GP30 with number 844, so the steam engine was renumbered to 8444. Southern Pacific had 89 SD40s, and they were numbered 8400 to 8489. So anyhow, there was perfect opportunity to do an SD40 with the UP steam engine number on it, so that gives them something to jump up and down about. The SD40 number 8444 went through the GRIP program in the 1980s, and it became the 7323, I think it was, is what it became when it was after it was rebuilt in the 1980s. Eastbound trains out of Roseville over Donner that were headed out with produce, they were handed off to the Union Pacific at Ogden. At Ogden, the Union Pacific picked up the trains and took them as far as North Platte, Nebraska, where the train would be handed off to an East Coast road like Conrail or Penn Central or whatever on the East Coast. Many times the Southern Pacific power would be left on the train at Ogden, and Union Pacific would add a locomotive of their own to the front of the motive power consist, and the SP power would run all the way through to North Platte. Same way westbound, a lot of times there'd be westbound freight trains coming off the Union Pacific that would have the Union Pacific power that would, and the train was handed off to the SP at Ogden. So it was quite common to see Union Pacific locomotives on the Southern Pacific equalizing mileage on the overland route. It took about 5 days for a freight train with perishables, a reefer train, leaving Roseville. It was about 5 days before the train arrived in New York or Philadelphia.